The herb of the day is Qiang. And Qiang is a really fun herb to discuss because its attributes are so obvious. When we look at Qiang and we smell Qiang, so much about its qualities I think are very obvious right away because the smell by itself is so powerful. Just even from this far, the smell coming to my nose is probably a 9 out of 10 in intensity. It smells very spicy and peppery. It's going immediately up even here to kind of the top of my sinuses just from smelling it. It has a sense just even in smelling it that it's going to kind of go like this. So we can expect from smelling it an acrid flavor, a very peppery flavor. We also want to look at the quality of Qiang itself. And so this is the Qiang in my hand. And it's actually very, very light. It's not a dense plant. Even though I have a good amount here, I don't feel like there's a heaviness on the palm of my hand. And so that light yang quality, its plantness being very thin, very dry, very light, tells us that it has that yang quality, and therefore we can expect that it's going to act in a yang manner. So we have both a spicy, peppery smell, or that kind of qi that goes up, that's very yang natured, as well as the lightness of the actual plant substance is very yang. And so we already know something about this plant. We haven't even looked in a book yet. We haven't even tasted it yet. But by using our senses and some basic common sense principles to evaluate staying in the paradigm of yin and yang, I can already expect this plant is going to act in a more yang manner. Now, when we look into books of old, Qiang was actually listed with Du in a lot of the books, and including in the Shenrong Bancao, the listing is actually under the herb Du, but Qiang is listed as an alternate name. So when we look in the past and we're seeing comments that the scholars made about Qiang, we have to filter it through this understanding that they're comparing and contrasting what seemed to be a similar herb with very different qualities depending on the region where they were getting it. And they believed that Qiang and Du were sort of two varietals of the same kind of plant species. But later, obviously, Du and Qiang were separated and were discussed together. So we have to discuss Qiang with that kind of paradigm in mind, that what the Shenrong Bancao is talking about is both, we can kind of compare and contrast that with Du. So Du was marked as an upper herb in the Shenrong Bancao. And I think that's important to pause because Du is a little bit less powerful in flavor, in qi than Qiang. An upper herb from the Shenrong Bancao is something that we can take for a long time, we can take in larger quantities, and we don't expect it to cause harm to our patient because inherently it's mild enough that the changes are sort of subtle and gradual. Whereas when we taste Qiang right off the bat, it's so much more powerful in its qualities. I would not expect Qiang to also be classified as an upper herb because it does have that more powerful, obvious, it's making change faster. Thus, I wouldn't necessarily expect that it is a good idea to take Qiang for a very long time or in very large doses. So that's that idea of the upper, middle, and lower is we're going to discern what's the appropriate clinical application for the Qiang that we have in the clinic today by tasting it and experiencing that shift in the body. Therefore, we can match that to the appropriate potency of effect with our treatments for our patients. When we look at the flavor and the nature, most of the scholars have said that Qiang and Du are acrid, bitter, and quite warm. So we can evaluate that as we take it. Do we feel a palpable thermal shift with Qiang? Certainly we're going to notice that spicy, peppery moving around. The Neijing tells us that acrid flavored herbs create movement in the body and disperse. But we also want to evaluate how much warming we feel from this herb alone. Because if we're treating coldness, dampness, wind in the body, and warming is a direct focus of our treatment, we need to be able to say that Qianghua is warming enough on its own, or do we need to pair it with other herbs to create a palpable thermal effect for our patient? So the yin and the yang quality, as I've just mentioned, is such an important component to understand Qianghua. And the scholars of old have also said that the qi of Qianghua is very strong and dispersing, that the flavor and the nature of it is quite thin and light, and therefore it is able to ascend, to disperse, to unblock. That we can expect this idea of floating and ascending yang-natured actions from Qianghua. So let's look at what we brewed and what the flavor seems to be. Typically when we brew herbs, we choose one herb. We brew it in this double-walled insulated thermos. This is about a 2-liter thermos, and the herbs sit, it's filled with boiling water, and the herbs sit for about 12 hours. This is a method that a majority of our patients use to prepare their whole formula. It's very convenient. It is compliance brilliant. And so this is also the method that we're using to taste the herbs and evaluate them. If my patient is going to take their formula like this, I want to experience what the Qianghua is going to taste like from this brewing method. Here we can see this is the liquid that came from the Qianghua. And this also, to me, I would describe this as a very thin liquid. It has that yang quality of, it's not very viscous, it's very, very watery. It also hasn't become very dark in color. So despite Qianghua having this very noticeable, loud aroma and flavor, it doesn't brew out something that's really nong, or this kind of rich, thick. So that also, when we read that some of the scholars have said that the Qianghua is quite light, this is what they're talking about, that lightness, that it's still brewing something that's sort of thin in quality, more yang in quality, than, for example, an herb that brews something very thick, very viscous, something that has more yin to it, like maybe huashi or Rhizome, or any of the dihuangs that create a thicker, richer liquid. So we are tasting 18 grams of Qianghua that was soaked in the thermos overnight. And again, super peppery, immediately goes up my nose and sort of hits this part of my forehead, that aroma, that spice. And it is really a powerful, I would say that smell is 9 out of 10 for sure. As the liquid enters my mouth, what's interesting is, because I can smell it, I'm waiting for this powerful flavor, but it almost tastes like sweet water going over my tongue. And only as I swallow it do I get that, almost like the end of the liquid has this peppery, spicy, everything that I can smell in the Qianghua is actually a Huai, a very kind of an ending flavor, a flavor that follows everything else. So that also shows me that kind of lightness of it. The flavor is not actually going in my tongue and being like this. It's loud in its pepperiness, but it's actually still very light feeling in my mouth. It's a little bit on the back of my tongue. It doesn't feel like it's soaked into my tongue. I don't feel it in my throat. So that thinness is very an interesting experience, that its acridity is quite loud, it's quite spicy, peppery, and yet the awareness of my body of that peppery taste, it's actually a very mild, lingering sensation. It's not unpleasant. It's not making me pucker. I don't know that I would necessarily remark about it. I can taste it. It's maybe a little bit like putting pepper on your food. It lifts everything else up, but doesn't overpower. I still feel flavor and sensation up here. I don't feel like even the liquid has done anything through my throat, my chest, and my abdomen. I am feeling a little bit warmer, so I do have the sense that My mouth is a little warmer, almost as if my tongue itself is a little bit warmer. I do have the sense that Qianghua will create a thermal property, that it will warm me up as I'm drinking it, and thus as I drink it today and over the next few days in the clinic, we are going to match how much warming is going to come from 18 grams of Qianghua, and do we need to pair it with other warming herbs. At this moment, I'm feeling like the warmth is noticeable and pleasant. I'm not flushing, but I am feeling almost as if somebody turned up the heat in the room by a few degrees. So the point of all of these lectures is to use our senses to explore the herbs in the exact same way that the ancients did. The ancient scholars didn't have a magical connection to the divine, that they were able to understand things that are beyond our grasp. What they did that was so brilliant is they were simply paying attention. And they were paying attention, deep, focused, unwavering attention. And so that's what we're doing with examining the herbs. This is the Qianghua that I have on hand at this moment and will be prescribing to my patients. And so no matter what a book tells me about Qianghua, I need to understand this particular batch, as this batch is going to have its own unique qualities based on where it was grown and when it was harvested and how it was dried, and then everything that's happened until this moment, even how long I've had it in the storage room, or if it was shipped across country in a hot semi-truck. So many things can affect the quality of the herb, and therefore that's why we're investigating the herb that will be the medicine for my patients. So we do all of that, and then we're going to match that with what the scholars said. And when we look at the application of Qianghua, there's a couple of things that jump out at me, and often it's talking about treating wind and dampness, the kinds of things where there's stuckness in the body, and that light acridity of Qianghua, that peppery, that spicy, that aroma that we can smell needs to go in and sort of percolate and unblock. The Bansao Gongmu lists some of the collected commentaries from scholars through time, and the Bansao Gongmu is talking about that Qianghua's qi is fierce, and compared to Duhua's qi is minute. And so this idea of fierce qi can treat a wrestling of wind and damp in the body, pains in the joints, and therefore we want to look to Qianghua for that idea of moving and unblocking. Li Shizhen says that Qianghua and Duhua are both able to chase away wind and dampness. But he has a great reference to the yin and yang quality of the herb. He says, the Su Wen tells us that from below to above, we have to guide movement with the quality of our herbs. And so Li Shizhen is reminding us that these things are rooted in the classic books of Chinese medicine. The Su Wen tells us that the movement in the body has to be guided by the qualities of herbs, and therefore the bitter, acrid, and warmth with this thinness is able to guide qi to ascend to the upper part of the body, and they're calling that yang within yin. So this coursing and reaching and flowing, those are yang qualities, and we were able to determine that or expect that just by looking at Qianghua. As I'm just a few minutes after I drank the Qianghua in the body, I do feel like there's a flow, and the difference in terms of this sensation, even though the aroma was so peppery, is I'm going to say that the flow is a little bit like a percolation, a light movement. Sometimes when we taste herbs, we feel like they are really powerful and they're almost going to unblock or smash away blockages. And Qianghua doesn't necessarily have the unblock. It has this, I feel the lightness of it able to get into all these spaces. Why I say that is I don't feel like it's going to create a reaction that today may not be advantageous as I'm treating patients, or for sometimes when we have observers and we taste an herb that's very powerful, that potent effect shifts the observer's day. Maybe they didn't need that much hot and acrid, and so they don't feel good even just because they're tasting an herb that is contraindicated to them. I don't feel like Qianghua is potent enough that it would make somebody feel bad, but it has this kind of light, moving, flowing. The Bansao Beiyao was written in almost the 1700s by Wang and Chuang, and he also says that Qianghua has a very strong and dispersing qi, but that this flavor is very thin and light, and therefore it can ascend. And this all really matches what I'm experiencing as feeling the Qianghua. It's still a little peppery in my mouth, but it's surprisingly nice. One of the comments from the Bansao Beiyao says that there's nowhere in the body that's so small that Qianghua can't enter into it, and there's no place in the body that's so large that Qianghua can't flow and course. So this is an interesting understanding of Qianghua. When we read in some of the more modern books, some of the comments will say that Qianghua, it makes sense for illnesses of the upper body, whereas Duhua in comparison makes sense for illnesses of the lower part of the body. And I think that can easily be understood when we look at these yin and yang properties, that Qianghua is so light and thin that it tends to move upward in a yang manner and unblock. This also reminds me that in patients who tend to have qi or yang that goes upward very easily, Qianghua may not be the right herb for it because it already is so light. It's going to easily float and rise up to the head. And so we may need a yin quality within the formula to keep that from going up and making someone not feel very good. So today we tasted 18 grams of Qianghua. I invite you to get some Qianghua for yourself and see what you think.